Welcome back to Reliable Prepper. If you're tuning in today, it's probably because you know deep down that the world is changing and it's not for the better. Civil unrest, growing political tensions, threats of cyber attacks, economic collapse, and even the looming possibility of nuclear conflict are all real possibilities in the times we're living in. These aren't just far-off concerns or topics for doomsday movies. They're realities we have to be prepared for right now. Chances are you already know that time is running short for those who aren't taking action. In today's video, we're going to dig deep into what it truly means to be ready for worst-case scenarios. Whether it's civil unrest in your town, a cyber attack that knocks out the power grid, or the unthinkable chaos of a nuclear event, we're going to cover it all. We're not here to spread fear, but to spread preparedness, because real preparedness means the difference between surviving and thriving when the world falls apart. And let's be real here. Every time we turn on the news, it's a reminder that something is off. We can feel it. So if you're serious about prepping, if you want to ensure that you and your loved ones stay safe no matter what, then make sure to follow Reliable Prepper on Facebook for daily tips, in-depth analysis, and more content. I also post regular updates on the most critical threats facing us today. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to this channel right here on YouTube, so you never miss any of the critical information we share. All right, let's dive into what the future might hold and how we can be ready to survive it. We're living in a time of unprecedented uncertainty. Recent events have shown us that we are edging closer to real chaos. If you've been following the news, you know about the failed assassination attempt on Donald Trump back in July 2024. This wasn't just some isolated incident. Political violence is becoming more common as the country's ideological divide deepens. Experts are warning that this division, especially with the upcoming contentious election, could lead to civil unrest like we haven't seen in decades. And let's be clear, this isn't just a political problem. There's a lot more at play here. According to recent data, cyber attacks targeting critical infrastructure in the US have increased by over 30% in the past 2 years, with power grids, healthcare systems, and financial institutions being primary targets. In 2023 alone, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security reported hundreds of cyber incidents, many linked to foreign adversaries like Russia and China. Take, for instance, the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack in 2021, which caused fuel shortages across the eastern U.S. for days. It exposed just how vulnerable our critical infrastructure is. The truth is, an attack like that could happen again, and it could hit even harder. We've got political tension on one side and international threats on the other. Look, the growing hostilities with Russia aren't going away anytime soon, and the threats of cyber attacks and even nuclear conflict are no longer just theoretical. Nations, especially those with adversarial relationships with the U.S., are actively developing the technology to cripple critical infrastructure through EMPs or cyber attacks. These scenarios can hit without warning, leaving us without power, communication, or even clean water for days, weeks, or longer. It's not just something we see in movies. It's a reality that we need to be thinking about right now. As preppers, it's our job to stay ahead of these developments. And let me tell you, there are warning signs that a lot of people are simply ignoring. We can't afford to be in that group. We've all seen how divided the country is, and as Election Day approaches, tensions are only going to increase. What happens if the election results are contested? What happens if one side refuses to accept the outcome? These are the types of questions we need to be asking ourselves, because these are the scenarios that lead to widespread civil unrest. Recent research from the University of Maryland has shown that large urban areas are 50% more likely to experience civil unrest during contested elections or political upheavals. We're already seeing the buildup. Cities are powder kegs, and it's only a matter of time before they explode. First, let's talk about situational awareness. In times of civil unrest, knowing what's happening around you is critical. I recommend staying connected with local news sources, community apps, and even social media platforms like Citizen to get real-time updates on protests or potential threats near you. Even police scanner apps can give you a leg up in knowing what's happening as it unfolds. But here's the thing, news only goes so far. You also need to be developing local intel. Talk to trusted neighbors, keep an eye on social media groups that are locally oriented, and understand what the general sentiment is around you. Are tensions rising in your town? Are there planned protests or demonstrations nearby? This kind of awareness could save your life. Second, have multiple escape routes mapped out. FEMA has long recommended having at least 2 to 3 exit routes from any location, especially in urban environments. After Hurricane Katrina, blocked roads were one of the main reasons people couldn't evacuate in time. Think about your home, your workplace, your kids' schools. If things go south, you need at least 3 different ways to get out of Dodge because main roads may be blocked or too dangerous to use. We're talking about back roads, hidden routes, and paths that most people wouldn't think of in a crisis. And don't just map them out, drive them, walk them, familiarize yourself with them so you're not guessing when the time comes. Next, let's touch on the importance of blending in. In politically charged times, displaying your allegiance, whether through bumper stickers, yard signs, or even clothing, can make you a target. We saw this clearly in 2020 when protests turned violent and people identified as belonging to opposing political groups were attacked. The key is to be as neutral as possible. The less attention you attract, the better your chances of avoiding conflict. And this applies not just to political statements. Even looking like you're well prepared can make you a target. If chaos breaks out and your house looks pristine while others are falling apart, you're going to draw attention. You want to blend into your surroundings as much as possible. Look like everyone else, act like everyone else, and avoid sticking out. The months immediately following the 2024 election will be critical. Given the polarization in the country, we could very well see violence and unrest, no matter who wins. The recent past has shown us that people on both sides of the political spectrum are willing to take extreme actions. This makes cities particularly dangerous. If you live in an urban area, the most important thing you can do is be ready to bug out if necessary. Research from the RAND Corporation shows that during times of widespread civil unrest, law enforcement capabilities can become severely stretched, with response times increasing by over 200%. That leaves homeowners vulnerable for hours, if not days. Now, relocating to a rural area during the most volatile times might be your best bet, but I get it. That's not an option for everyone. If you can't leave, then you need to focus on fortifying your home. Start by reinforcing your doors with security bars or upgrading to shatterproof glass windows. Simple steps like this can go a long way. Even something as basic as installing motion-detecting floodlights around your property can deter potential intruders. You need to think of your home like a castle, with multiple layers of defense. Start with longer screws in your door frames and install polycarbonate window panels. They're lightweight, strong, and can stop debris, rocks, and even bullets. Security cameras are another must-have, but they shouldn't just be for show. Position them in places where they aren't easily spotted or tampered with. You want to know what's happening around your home at all times. A solid perimeter defense can give you the early warning you need to react before anything happens. Creating a layered defense system is key because during periods of unrest, law enforcement might be spread thin and you may need to rely solely on your own defenses to keep your family safe. Now, this doesn't just mean building up physical defenses either. You also need to have a plan in place for defending your home if law enforcement can't get to you in time. On top of physical preparations, let's talk about legal preparedness. We've all heard stories of overreaching government actions during periods of unrest. You need to be familiar with your local laws regarding firearms, self-defense, and home protection. The U.S. Department of Justice has found that during large-scale riots, crimes like looting and home invasions can increase by as much as 70%. Knowing the legal boundaries of protecting your home is critical. This is not something to leave until the last minute. You don't want to be caught off guard in the event that martial law is declared or that local authorities begin cracking down on civilian actions. And here's a critical point. Have less lethal options. Pepper spray, stun guns, or even bear spray can be great alternatives to lethal force if the situation doesn't quite call for it, but you still need to defend yourself. Understanding the law around these options is just as important. Next up is one of the most realistic and immediate threats we face today: cyber warfare. The United States has already experienced multiple attacks on critical infrastructure, and this trend is only going to escalate. We're talking about attacks that could bring down the entire power grid, communication networks, and even financial systems. Here's where your preparation needs to go beyond food and water. You need to be thinking about how to stay in contact with loved ones when the grid is down. One of the best tools for this is a ham radio. It's reliable, independent of infrastructure, and it's one of the few ways to communicate when cell towers and the internet go dark. If you don't already have a ham radio system in place, now is the time to invest in one. Make sure you're licensed and familiar with how to operate it, and keep a list of frequencies for local emergency services and other prepper networks. The United States power grid is aging. Much of it was built in the 1960s and 70s. Experts estimate that large portions of the grid are unprepared for both natural disasters and deliberate cyber attacks. The 2021 Texas winter storm left millions without power due to grid failure, showing how vulnerable the system is. You can't rely solely on gasoline-powered generators, especially in long-term grid-down scenarios. Solar energy is your friend here. I recommend setting up a basic solar generator with a battery bank. This will allow you to power critical devices like radios and medical equipment without relying on fuel. And don't forget about alternative energy options. Wind turbines, hand-crank generators, or even DIY battery systems can be part of your strategy for energy independence. The point is to think beyond gasoline and plan for a situation where you need power for the long haul. Another important step is to protect your electronics from EMPs. An EMP could knock out everything from your smartphone to your vehicle's computer system. The solution? Faraday cages. You don't need anything fancy, just a metal trash can with some insulation can work. Store essential electronics like radios, batteries, and GPS systems in these to keep them safe. And one more thing, don't overlook water purification. In a grid-down scenario, access to clean water could become a real issue. We saw this in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria, where power outages caused water systems to fail, leaving entire regions without clean water. You need purification systems that don't rely on electricity, like gravity-fed filters or distillation methods that can be done over a fire. These are the kinds of details that will keep you alive in a long-term crisis. All right, folks, we've covered a lot so far, but we're only halfway through. If you're finding this information useful and want to stay on top of the latest in prepping strategies, make sure you head over to Facebook and follow Reliable Prepper. I post daily tips, news updates, and more in-depth analysis to help you stay prepared for whatever comes next. And while you're here, don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel so you're always one step ahead. Let's talk about the unthinkable nuclear and EMP attacks. With Russia's aggression and the advancements in military technology, this is no longer a scenario we can ignore. EMPs in particular are devastating because they can cripple an entire country's infrastructure in seconds, leaving everything from your phone to your car useless. First, if you're preparing for a nuclear event, you need to have a shelter plan. Know the locations of public fallout shelters in your area. If you're in a position to shelter at home, make sure your basement or a reinforced room is stocked with radiation protection gear, such as potassium iodide tablets and plenty of long-term food and water supplies. Now let's talk about potassium iodide tablets. They're one of the most critical pieces of your nuclear prep kit. Potassium iodide works by saturating your thyroid with non-radioactive iodine, reducing the likelihood of radioactive iodine being absorbed by the gland, which is one of the primary health risks in a nuclear event. However, it's important to remember that it doesn't protect against other forms of radiation, so it's not a cure-all. You need to take it as soon as possible after exposure or as instructed by local authorities, but it's just one part of an overall survival strategy. If you suspect you've been exposed to radiation, your priority is to minimize further contamination. Remove your outer clothing immediately, as it may have absorbed radioactive particles. Seal it in a plastic bag and dispose of it properly. Shower thoroughly with soap and water to remove any particles from your skin. Pay close attention to areas like your hair, hands, and face. Time is critical here. The faster you decontaminate, the better your chances of minimizing radiation exposure. Radiation detection is something many preppers overlook. Having a Geiger counter and knowing how to use it is essential in a nuclear fallout scenario. This device will help you determine when it's safe to leave your shelter and which areas to avoid. You'll want to stay sheltered for at least 48 hours after an attack, as radiation levels are highest during this time. Depending on the severity of the fallout, you may need to remain sheltered for longer, possibly weeks, until levels decrease to a safer threshold. You also want to ensure you have proper air filtration systems in place. In the aftermath of a nuclear attack, air quality will plummet, and being able to filter out contaminants could mean the difference between life and death. Filters designed to handle radioactive dust and particles should be part of your shelter setup. For EMP attacks, as I mentioned earlier, EMP-proof containers or Faraday cages are your best defense. But don't stop there. Consider keeping an older vehicle that doesn't rely heavily on electronic systems. A study by the Congressional EMP Commission revealed that a large-scale EMP attack could disable 90% of the country's electronic infrastructure. Modern cars, relying heavily on computer systems, would fail in such an event, leaving you without transportation when you need it most. But let's not forget about transportation options that don't rely on electronics at all. Bicycles, horses, or even non-electronic watercraft could become invaluable if all the infrastructure is down. These are real-world solutions that many people overlook because we're so reliant on modern technology. Planning ahead by having these alternatives in place could be the difference between being stuck or staying mobile in a post-EMP world. Now let's consider the economic side of things. It's no secret that the economy is unstable. Between inflation, rising national debt, and potential global conflicts, a full-scale economic collapse is not out of the question. When we talk about prepping for an economic collapse, we're not just talking about stocking up on food and supplies. We're talking about preparing for a total breakdown of the financial system. One of the most important things you can do is diversify your assets. Don't keep all of your money in one place or in one form. Precious metals like gold and silver are solid investments that tend to hold value even when currency does not. I also recommend keeping a stash of cash on hand because ATMs and banks may shut down during a crisis. We've seen this happen before. In the 2008 financial crisis, banks in some countries imposed withdrawal limits, and citizens could only withdraw a fraction of their savings. You don't want to be stuck in that situation, and here's something that often gets overlooked: developing barter systems. In a collapsed economy, certain items become invaluable. Things like ammunition, alcohol, medical supplies, and hygiene products will be in high demand. Building a network of trusted individuals who are prepared to barter can ensure that you always have access to what you need. But, and this is important, bartering also comes with risks. Trust is crucial, so building relationships now with people you can rely on will pay off later. In Argentina's economic collapse of the early 2000s, barter networks flourished, helping communities maintain access to essentials during the worst of the crisis. Lastly, focus on self-sustainability. If you haven't already started growing your own food or collecting rainwater, now is the time. Gardening has been shown to significantly reduce dependency on grocery stores. A family of 4 can meet a significant portion of their food needs with just a quarter-acre garden if planned correctly. These renewable resources will be far more valuable than any currency in a long-term economic depression. Even if you live in an apartment, you can start growing food in small containers or setting up rain collection systems on your balcony. Every little bit helps. We've covered a lot of ground today. The future may be uncertain, but one thing is clear. We cannot afford to ignore the signs that the world as we know it is changing fast. From political violence and civil unrest to global cyber threats and even nuclear conflict, the threats we face are real and they're growing every day. As advanced preppers, we've got to take our preparedness to a deeper level. Let's recap some of the most critical actions we need to take now. Stay ahead of civil unrest by being aware of what's happening in your area at all times. Build multiple escape routes from your home, work, and other key locations. And make sure to blend in and remain neutral in politically charged times. Post-election chaos could be one of the most dangerous times in modern history, so it's crucial to either relocate to a safer rural area or fortify your urban home to the point where it can withstand a prolonged period of violence or unrest. Be legally prepared for any government crackdowns that may occur during these times. The growing threat of cyber warfare means we need to ensure we have off-grid communication tools such as ham radios and that our electronics are protected from EMP strikes. Solar power generators should be high on your list of essential gear, providing you with the energy independence necessary for a long-term grid collapse. In the event of nuclear conflict, ensure you have proper shelter locations identified, whether public fallout shelters or a reinforced room in your home, and that you're well stocked with iodine tablets, Geiger counters, and long-term supplies. If an EMP attack is your primary concern, make sure your key electronics and vehicles are protected, and you've taken the steps to ensure your survival in a world without digital infrastructure. And finally, in case of an economic collapse, diversification is the name of the game. Don't rely on just one form of wealth. Tangible assets like gold, silver, and barterable goods will serve you well. Build a strong local network for bartering and work towards self-sufficiency by growing your own food and securing renewable water sources. Now is the time to put these strategies into action. The world is changing fast and you don't want to be caught unprepared. Remember, being an advanced prepper means thinking beyond just food and water. It means anticipating the threats that others may overlook and ensuring that no matter what happens, you're ready. If you found this guide helpful, make sure to follow Reliable Prepper on Facebook for more in-depth discussions and daily tips that you won't want to miss. We're constantly updating our strategies based on the latest developments in the world, and we'd love for you to join the community. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. The threats we've talked about today are evolving, and staying informed is one of the best ways to ensure your continued safety. Thanks for watching, and stay prepared. And remember, it's not about fear, it's about being prepared. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay aware, and keep your prepping sharp. We'll see you in the next video.